And we also have some breaking news, more breaking news. One of the biggest breaches in Supreme Court history, and we don't know who did it. SCOTUS just announced its investigation into the Dobbs opinion leaker has come up short. Back with me is NBC News White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. So they interviewed a lot of people. Why were they not able to find anyone?
Well, Katie, we're pouring through documents that the court has just released, and the court has called this a grave assault on the judicial system and a terrible betrayal. And what they have done is they have outlined the forensic steps they have taken. And the headline is they have found no perpetrator. And that is certainly a concern. Now, to take people back to what we're talking about, this was the Dobbs case that overturned Roe v. Wade. And back in May, a draft opinion that indicated that the court's conservative majority would overturn the right to abortion in this country was leaked. It was published by Politico. And what that was able to do, as many analysts have looked at it, was in effect to lock in the conservative justices between the time of the release and the time of the ultimate decision being announced publicly. Could that have changed the course of history? Would that have affected decisions that the justices could have made among themselves to negotiate or to work out perhaps a different outcome? That may not be known. Because of this unusual case, something extraordinary in the history of the court turned this over to the U.S. Marshals. They then worked with the Chertoff Group. You know the name Michael Chertoff. He was a former official in the Bush White House as the head of Homeland Security. What they did is they looked at things like fingerprint analysis, digital analysis of the copy of the draft report that was ultimately published. They went and looked at hardware like printers that belong to court employees to try to find out, was there any evidence? No one confessed. No evidence surfaced that identified a court employee. And what this report goes on to say is that there are many kinds of steps for securing these highly sensitive documents that should take place, ways to put sort of an electronic keychain on important work that the court and the justices are doing to prevent it going out the door. They also indicate that they don't have evidence of a hack, so someone getting into the computer system from the outside. They also leave open the possibility that there could have been an inadvertent misplacement, although that seems hard to imagine, but they acknowledge that could have happened. Someone leaving a copy of the draft in a place where it could have been scooped up, taken out the door, and found its way into the hands of reporters. So this is a whodunit many months now after this very consequential ruling. So they provide a number of steps that they believe the court needs to take to secure the work of the court going forward, and they say that the investigation will continue. But if the expectation was they would be able to name a culprit, that didn't happen today. Katie?
This leak, from all outside appearances, caused some tension in the Supreme Court and potentially some tension between justices. There are big ideological divides right now on the Supreme Court, some pretty serious arguments that are coming in front of the Supreme Court, the Dobbs case obviously being the biggest one of late. You've been watching and following the cases so far and the oral arguments. What's your sense of how the justices are getting along?
Well, the justices talk about the fact that they work very hard at having a collegial relationship. They have lunch regularly. They work at having an ability to have a cooperative ability to work together, even though there are clear ideological differences. And this is a conservative supermajority. With 6 conservatives, they really have a way to shape how these cases turn out. I've observed a number of oral arguments, and there are moments where you can see a bit of back and forth between the justices. That plays out in the audio that the public can hear as well, where you can sense that there are tense moments in differing views. At the same time, this is considered such a deep betrayal of the court that the justices wanted to know who was responsible. It appears the focus has been on court employees, and that would, of course, include clerks who have a high degree of discretion and security within the court, others who might have come in contact with the paperwork. The group that looked into this investigation was scanning equipment, files, fingerprints, all kinds of things, trying to trace where could these documents have passed through. And there is not a piece of evidence to a preponderance of evidence, a 51% level, that allows them to say they've identified the culprit. Will this allow someone to come forward? Will this allow a break in the case at some point now that this has happened? That could be a possibility. Perhaps the justices themselves can try to exert additional pressure. We don't know. But the relationships on the court have been put under a great deal of scrutiny. We know the security of the court has been under a heightened sense in our larger political environment, where there have been threats to the court. Hardened security outside the court has increased. And part of what has played out here is that the trust in the court has also come into question in the minds of many Americans. And this leak has been one piece of that. And today, no comforting answers after a very thorough investigation.